Welcome back to Daybreak and thank you for joining us. It's time to dive into our discussion segment. And this morning we're focusing on a development that has once again drawn national attention to the security situation in the Northeast. The recent Borno attacks and the president's decision to deploy and engage service chiefs in response to the renewed wave of violence. This is not the first time such measures have been taken. Now, over the years, successive administrations have reshuffled and redeployed military leadership in an effort to reinvigorate counterinsurgency operations, particularly during periods of intensified attacks by Boko Haram and its splinter groups. Excuse me. Now, while these interventions have sometimes led to short-term operational gains, including the recapture of terrorists and disruption of insurgent networks, the persistence of attacks has continued to raise questions about long-term effectiveness, coordination, and strategy. Now, the human and economic tone of insurgency in the Northeast has been severe. According to available conflict tracking and humanitarian data, tens of thousands of lives have been lost since the onset of the insurgency in 2009, with estimates exceeding 35,000 deaths. In addition, over 2 million people have been displaced across Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe states, while infrastructure damage and disruptions to livelihoods have cost the region billions of naira and significantly impacted development. So this morning, we will be analyzing the implications of the recent presidential deployment of service chiefs, what it signals for Nigeria's security architecture, and whether such measures can deliver lasting results. Now, joining us this morning is Confidence Macharry. He's a senior analyst with SBM Intelligence, and together we will be having this conversation. Good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Maimuna. It's great to be here.
Good to have you. Now, let's start off with your perspective and what you see on the ground. What do you make of the recent attacks in Borno State, indicating, or rather, what does it indicate about the current security realities facing the Northeast? Because we have seen so many attacks apart from the bombing, the recent twin bombing that we just saw in Maiduguri. There has been attack, on different communities from Borno and other communities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more often than not, most of the attacks in the Northeast tend to take place in the rural parts of the states that are involved in insurgency. I'm talking Borno, Yobe, Adamawa, and the likes. So most people do not really bat an eyelid if there's an ISWAP attack in Gaidam, in Yobe, or something that's happening in Malam in the northern fringes of the Lake Chad. But when it hits as close to home as Maiduguri, it leaves a lot to be desired. And the most prescient takeaway from this is that before the twin bombings that happened in Maiduguri this week, there was a sense of security around the capital that, at the very least, the military has done such a stellar job in pushing the terrorists to the hinterlands. And for the past I think since Shekau died, the military's focus has been on the more dangerous faction of Boko Haram, which is Islamic State West Africa province. But I think these attacks have sort of jolted them back to the reality that the enemy that they have neglected for so long has risen up from the ashes to become quite a dangerous enemy. So much so that the false sense of security Maiduguri has now been shattered. And as a whole, it gives the picture of a security situation that has not been handled in the way and manner in which it is supposed to be handled, because essentially Maiduguri is a garrison town. There are lots of military formations everywhere, and for you to have suicide bombers making it into the city center to be attacking places as they used to attack at random, as they used to, and now doing it in 2026, it seems the clearest indicator is that the failure to manage the insurgency in the hinter and the rural parts of the North is have made it possible for the urban centers to also be involved in the warfare.
All right. So we have seen the deployment of the service chiefs by the president, and each time we have incidences like this, you hear the president, deploying the service chiefs to this. It's almost sounding like a broken record. But at the end of the day, do we record some successes? Yes, we do, but not as how Nigerians will be comfortable and satisfied to know that this insecurity issue has faded off totally. So how does this typically affect, the ongoing counterinsurgency operations, being that we are seeing the service chiefs in that region? Will it bring some sort of hope and relief for the people?
I think it depends on where the service chiefs goes. See, theoretically, if you have the entirety of the army leadership or the military leadership in one place, it is a security risk. But Nigeria is a security risk at the moment. Nobody is going to look at the security situation and say this country is not a security risk. But the wisdom of having the service chiefs in the northeast is for them to be on the ground, see a first-hand assessment of the management of the insurgency, see the places where improvements need to be made, and in the areas where you need an advancement of troop morale, you get troop morale. But you have said this, it almost sounds like a broken record. Almost every time you have a major attack, the president says, we're doing this, you're deploying this and everything. It simply does not work. It doesn't give people the needed hope because it has become so routine. But beyond becoming so routine, I think the reason why it doesn't seem to materially change facts on the ground, that is this deployment, is the fact that, for one, you do not get to see all of the service chiefs, the heads of the armed forces, the three of them, go to the places where these things are most affected. Yes, for the time being, if the chief of army staff is in Maiduguri, you expect a little bit of, the whole Nigerian culture of eye service, soldiers moving up and down, trying to make sure that the entries and the exits into the cities are safe. But for the real issues that the troops need to keep this insurgency at bay, I don't think their presence is really going to do much because, number one, in the first place, they are seeing these deployments as routine, just to go and make sure that, at the very least, it is reflected in the headlines that we are there and we are doing something about it. What they are doing materially about it is a different story. If you take stock of the insurgency, at least from 2013, when the federal government declared a state of emergency in the northeast for some time, and you would see some of the progresses and some of the defeats and the setbacks that the Nigerian military has faced. They are enough for you 13 years later to say, this is what we've done and we should not repeat this mistake. But right now, those mistakes that made them lose between 2013 and 2015, they are still repeating them, so much so that the problem has not only splintered. I mean, you mentioned that Boko Haram now has several splinter factions. Even in the old Boko Haram, which was led by Shekau, still has its own factions and everything. So some of those mistakes, they are being repeated in the sense that you have isolated camps, you have isolated military bases that are highly defensible. And sometimes it takes quite a long time before reinforcement comes. Now, I wouldn't sit here and say I'm a soldier. I'm not a soldier. I've never carried a gun before. But I've researched the problem long enough to know that the sort of coordination that made the MNJTF in its heydays to be successful, we don't get to see it anymore. And why we don't get to see it anymore? Because some of the politics in the region, the geopolitical tensions between Nigeria and its neighbors have made the MNJTF, for all intents and purposes, dead. And then secondly, the operational synergy you get to see between the armed forces, that is the Air Force and the Army, troops on the ground, that old rivalry is still there, because in one of the most recent attacks that took place in the hinterlands of Borno last week, some of the soldiers who spoke, I think, to Daily Trust said that they had an attack going on, and they called for air support, and the air support simply wasn't coming. This was the same issue that led the former Chief of Army Staff, then when he was in office, Buratai, to set up the Nigerian Army Air Wing, which of course caused a little bit of problem, and then they had to shove the idea aside. And so, by my own estimations, I think to marginally improve the situation in the Northeast, it goes beyond just the defense minister saying that we have ordered and redeployed the military chiefs to the northeast.
Okay, so what would have been, a proper measure in place of, deploying these service chiefs to that
so I was
region?
coming to that. The real issue with Nigerian security is lack of accountability. I mean, it permeates every facet of Nigerian life. Let's say I'm the president, and then there is a bombing in Maiduguri, a place which is thought to be safe compared to other parts of the state, and that illusion has been shattered. I am not going to be sending service chiefs there to go and do what? There is no matching order. You send them there. What did you tell them to go and do? Did you tell them to make sure that Maiduguri is no longer being attacked? Did you send them to say that there should be no infiltration of terrorists, suicide bombers in the city? Okay, now let's keep Maiduguri aside. You have at least 4 local government areas in Borno State, which by normal circumstances, somebody who is not under the suzerainty of the Islamic State cannot get into. Guzamala, Mate, Abadam, and some of the other areas around the Timbuktu Triangle. You can't get there as a normal civilian. Now, if you are sending the service chiefs there, are you telling them that, see, I give you between now and the end of the next quarter to make sure that those areas, including Damboa, where the Nigerian Brigadier General was killed, those places have been retaken from ISWAP.
Yeah.
If I was a business, let's say you're my boss, and then you tell me, do this, do that, there is a key performance index by which I will say that, okay, you have done this job, and then you require a commendation or a promotion. We are not seeing the same. We are not seeing the president impose some sort of, should I say, a matching order that is very effective enough for you to see a change. And as a result, whenever these attacks happen, the president is just comfortable enough to say, we have deployed these guys there, let them take care of the situation, and then they know. And this is the thing, the absence of consequences, the impunity that reigns, they know that if they get there and the situation does not improve, the president is not going to sack them, there will be no heads that will roll, their salaries will be paid, they will come to the media and spin the story as much as they like, and there will be no consequences. So it is this absence of consequences that make the situation as dire as it is.
Okay, so now let's look at, the operational effectiveness of these service chiefs. Even though you have been able to, lay it on the table as to how really is not important to have them in that region because they're really not going to do much. And we're still yet to get, a clearer picture of the directives that were given to them by the Mr. President. So what are the key factors that determine whether, the new service chiefs can make a real difference on the ground?
I think I've mentioned I've mentioned the first. The first was operational synergy.
Absolutely.
That's old tradition of the military and the security forces operating in silos. I think it is coming back. In the past, I think one of the things that I think General Chris Musa's predecessor did, that's Leo Irabo, when he was chief of defense staff, he made that operational synergy a key focus of his own administration as chief of defense staff. But the current chief of defense staff would need to key into that to make sure that if you're having the Islamic State West Africa province launching amphibious attacks in the Adamawa part of Cameroon, and then you have ISWAP attacking military bases on foot, and then the army needing to deploy to defend those troops, you also need air support. The air support is not coming, and what is particularly touching about this is the dry season, and this is the best time for you to carry out airstrikes against these armed groups, but they are not coming. I think, if I were to make a guess about what's going on, I think that wait for the Americans to actually take the lead with the deployments we've seen from the Americans in Bauchi for the health training and everything, I think it has largely stalled some of the initiatives they would have taken on their own. And I have to say this clearly, that the Americans are busy with Iran. So the kind of resources you come to expect in terms of training, in terms of material, that you will say will be the game changer in the security situation in the Northeast, until Operation Epic Fury has been seen to its conclusive end, the Trump administration is not going to have its eyes on Nigeria. At the moment, I do think that even if Iran is ended today, Cuba will be the next in line of priorities for the US president. Nigeria would actually rank third. So you cannot continue to wait for the Americans. You have to take the initiative. So I've spoken about operational synergy between the armed forces. I would also talk about improvement of the ability of the civilian GTF to take on these terrorists. In the past few years, there have been a couple of issues: the army refusing to trust the CGTF and every other thing. But yes, all of those issues are not insurmountable. They are very surmountable. They know the issues they have with the CGTF. They have not. They have not resolved them. So I think it is time to resolve them. And to be fair to the military, they cannot be everywhere at the same time. Which is why they need sister agencies as much as they can get. And away from the military, this is something the Nigerian government has to really put eye into. You have the police force that is supposed to be the first line of defense, and you're not utilizing them. If you reclaim a village today from, say, the Islamic State of Boko Haram, I do not expect the Nigerian army to be there safeguarding the state, the town. If it is not a border town, the Nigerian army is not supposed to be there. That is the function of the Nigerian police force. That is the function of the NSCDC. In addition, with if they need enough manpower, the CJTF, but they're not utilizing any of those. They're not utilizing any of those things. They are so hell bent on using the military for every and any security issue, and the military is one out. There is also the thing about resources and what they seem to prioritize. So I think the report Daily Trust put out last week, there was a particular soldier who talked about multiple threats at multiple times,
yes,
and then having to rationalize who to attack, where to defend, where to abandon. I think a strengthening of the troop in those places would go a long way. But before you start talking about strengthening the troop and their morale, you have to first of all deal with the demoralization that is currently going on. If ISWAP is able to attack 4 bases at the same time, at the same day, it sends a clear message to the soldiers that, look, you're on your own and we're going to get you if commanding officers could be killed. So when you go there as chief of army staff, you're not supposed to go there and blame your soldiers for not being able to hold a garrison that a full battalion of 700, 900 soldiers are supposed to hold. And then you staffed it to 150, 200 people. There's precious little that they can do, So these are some of the issues: demoralization, improving morale, and then paying them their stipends and allowing them to go and live when they're supposed to go.
Now you made mention of using sister agencies and not putting all the weight on the Nigerian military, and this brings me to the agitation for the creation of state policing, which has been going on, and thankfully, should we say, it was a formal statement from the president, because that statement was being put out during a little dinner at the State House, calling on the National Assembly to look into creating state police. So do you think with that creation of state policing, will it really help in fighting, or rather, should we say eradicating? Because we are hoping that all of this would fade off sooner or later. So do you think this creation of state policing can also play a key role in tackling the insecurity issues that we're having in Nigeria? I'm sorry, I'm asking this because we have had a lot of security analysts say that these security issues and the people that are attacking these people are home base. There are people that they know their families, they know their homes, they know them. So what's your take on that?
The thing most people do not realize is that Nigeria has been running state policing in several forms, but just not in name state police. There is hardly any state at the moment that does not have its own vigilante. The problem with those vigilante outfits, state backs, is that they do not have the kind of weaponry that will be sophisticated enough to take on the criminals. So if I should take my analysis away from the Northeast, which is more dire than several parts of the country, I would say that state police is due. I mean, we are a federal system. It is normal for a federal system to not have a unified and centralized police force. So state policing is a key part of the federal system. But here's where the Nigerian experience should be a little different. Most of the arguments and most of the proposition around state policing that I've seen have crystallized around making the state police a replica and a copy and paste version of the national police we have at the moment. So we have the Nigerian police force. So it will no longer be the Nigerian police force. It will now be the various state police forces. The structure will remain, which means that there will be an inspector general of the state police forces that will be controlled by the state governor, which is why the immediate past IGP refused to endorse the idea, because it will simply make governors demigods in their own domain. I key a little bit into that argument, which is why I'm going to say that if we go into state policing with the same logic and the same idea that we are thinking about it now, which is recreation of the Nigerian police force at the moment, but at state level, we are going to come back in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years, and say, oh, we have tried state policing, it did not work. Let us go back to federal policing. This is very Nigerian. I'm just give me a moment, and I'll say this because we are a very, very short-tempered people where we'll try something, we will not do it very well, and then we'll come back and say, oh, we've tried it and it failed. You haven't tried it very well. Now, for the state policing thing to work, you have to look at states and areas in some other places across the world where they've done state policing to see their model. If you go to the US, for instance, where we borrowed our federalism from, you do not have a state governor controlling the state's policing architecture. Each county has its own police office. Its borough has its own police. The state has its own police. And then the FBI exists if there is a crime that has been committed across state lines. If you want to have state policing in Nigeria, then one of the first things you have to look is take the manner and the structure and the control away from the state governors to prevent what you're fearing, that state governors will now become demigods to use the police to their own advantage. What does that mean? It simply means that you're going to devolve policing down to the lowest level. We are in Utako, in Abuja at the moment, which means that Utako community will have its own police force. The next community will have its own police force. And then if there is a case where there is a misuse, there will be a federal board of inquiry that will now say, okay, you have, yes, that will oversee all of these things. Now, the reason I say this is because if you continue to have this current structure the way it is going to lead to a lot of disasters. Now, I know clearly for the financial angle that it is not every community, because my own advocacy for state policing is that the communities themselves be responsible for their own security. Right. But I realize that Nigeria is uneven. So there are communities maybe in the north that may not be able to advocate for their own staffing of their own police, which is where the state government or the federal government can give them grants, give them subventions and say, from so and so time, we are going to fund you and we expect you to be on your own. So if you're going to be doing state policing, you have to take a lot of these nuances into account. You don't just do things uniformly and then when it doesn't work, you say, we have tried it didn't work, let's go back to the former one.
I think that sounds like, a very familiar line with Nigeria saying that, oh, it won't work in Nigeria, we have tried it and it will work. But then let's move ahead. I'm talking about strategy and coordination. Now, in your analysis, is Nigeria's counterinsurgency approach sufficiently coordinated across the military, intelligence agencies, and other stakeholders?
They like to think so. At the very least, the National Security Advisor likes to think so. But I think it depends on where you are. So in Zamfara, for instance, there is a much greater integration between the community protection guards, with the police, and the Nigerian military. Zamfara is big. So you do not get to expect the Nigerian military to be everywhere. So they've cracked the code in the sense that whenever they want to go into operations where they have to deal with bandits that are well armed, well resourced, and well sophisticated, they don't go at it alone. They carry the police as well as the community protection guards. In several ways than one, it has worked. Zamfara's security has not really improved, but in places where they synchronize these entities together, the operations always see a success. But if we take it away from Zamfara, some of these issues remain. Now, the trust that the Nigerian military would have for the police and the community protection guards in Zamfara is not the same level of trust the Nigerian military and the DSS will have for the police in Ondo. These issues remain. And I will give you an example. In 2019, there was a memo that leaked to the public in the newspapers that Boko Haram was planning to raise funds by attacking some markets in Ondo states. The memo was from the DSS. They passed it to the Nigerian police because the DSS didn't want to get involved because it was a policing issue. This is where these guys are. Go and pick them up. What happened? The police leaked the memo to the press. And then the DSS swore they would never work with the police again. These issues, if you talk to people in the DSS today, if you talk to people in the Nigerian military, they will tell you they do not trust the police enough. So when you have issues like this is where the commander-in-chief is supposed to come in. Now, if the commander-in-chief is as aloof as a person like Tinubu, who is more focused on the economy, this is where the state governor is supposed to come in. Now, you had a similar situation in Kebbi, where there was intelligence that this girls' school was going to be attacked. You brought in the people who were supposed to protect the girls from being attacked. 30 minutes before the attack took place, it took the security forces were withdrawn. Till date, we don't know who withdrew them. There's no accountability. And so, if we say that we should integrate and synchronize our forces, these are some of the issues you're supposed to be dealing with. There's a reason why the Office of the National Security Advisor exists. In some other places, the NSA's office is mostly an advisory position. But in Nigeria, it is powerful enough to have intelligence services under its own control. The question is, what exactly has it done? Because if you look at some of the arrests that the NSA's office has made, it made it independently of the other security forces. So that same old problem of security forces working in silos still exists. So you might have cracked the code in Zamfara, but Zamfara is just one small part of the country. It is something you need to recreate in several parts. So to a great extent, they've been able to do it in the southeast. So the question is, why are you not doing it across board?
So how can we be able to fix these loopholes and the gaps? Because each time we talk about intelligence gathering, I always say it is not a problem in Nigeria. Because
Absolutely.
we get this information.
Yes.
We get this. I mean, there's always an alert somewhere. Someone must always, send in an alert. And they usually send this alert to the right agencies for them to, be aware and be at alert. But at the end of the day, we still see these attacks do happen. So, where are these gaps? How can we fill these gaps up? How can we fill them up?
Again, this is why we have the Office of the National Security Advisor. But it's a little unfortunate that this is not what he's doing, because it's supposed to be his core responsibility. But again, if you have an NSC that is not really pulling his weight the way he's supposed to pull his weight, looking at all of this, because before that it was really bad. I mean, the NSA before him, that's Babagana Monguno, wasn't really in talking terms with the service chiefs, and Buhari wasn't really concerned. And that has largely seeped into it. Now, if you have an NSA who is not pulling his weight the way he should pull his weight, this is why you have state governors. State governors, to their credit, have invested a lot in security. Sometimes you see them buying weapons. If they are coastal states, you see them buying speedboats for the police for them to use. The military chiefs meet a lot with the state governor. This is a meeting they are supposed to have and say, see, we have this problem. The DSS, the director of the DSS in each state, is familiar with the state governor. So the DSS has this information. There is no information in any attack anywhere in this country that the DSS is not aware of. So as you rightly pointed out, the intelligence is there. But one fundamental problem that we face as Nigerians, and this is not a problem of 2026, there's been a problem since, at the very least, since 1966, is prioritization of intelligence, in the sense that intelligence is always there, as you've alluded to. The question is what they choose to do with it. Now, Nigeria is a country that is heavily tilted towards regime security than national security. So if they judge a threat, and the threat is seen to be something that affects the man in Aso Rock, they are more likely to act on the issue. I mean, you saw the way they reacted to the alleged coup attempts in October. You had the military departments, the army, the air force, the navy, and the defense intelligence agency working together to stop the threat. But when it comes to things like national security, you would not see that coordination, because the intelligence outlook is geared towards protecting whoever the man in Aso Rock is, and then any other person, any other issue can be resolved later. If we want this coordination, this synchronization to work, the country's security architecture and its outlook at the moment would have to de-emphasize its overwhelming focus on regime security and national security, which will mean prioritizing the life of the man on the streets. Until that happens, I think we're still going to be operating in silos.
Now, talking about the lives of the man on the street, I mean, with over 2 million people displaced and also tens of thousands of lives lost since 2009 due to these insurgents, how would you assess the long impact of this on the North talking about insurgency? Yeah.
It is, beyond looking at the displacement numbers, which of course is sad. I think Nigeria has up to about, last time I checked, you had about close to 2 million displaced people.
Yes.
The numbers could be higher. We are looking at it in terms of people leaving their homes and then going into IDP camps. But I think there's actually a much more dangerous problem in the dimension of security, because on one hand, they're already poor for people who are doing nefarious activities to recruit from. I mean, if you go to Yola today, the Sheila Boys problem are actually people who left their communities due to violence and then got into street gangs. There's security angle, and then there's also the food security angle, because a lot of these people who are displaced were farmers. I was in Benue the other day, and many people who escaped the Yelewata massacre told me that they were on their farms when they got the alert that they were going to be attacked, and then they had to run to their houses, and they were not safe in their houses. Some of them were attacked, and then they had to go to Maiduguri, to go to Makodi for safety. And I think when we at SBM Intelligence put out our first report on food security in 2015, we talked to some people who told us that in the 10 years leading up to 2015, they hadn't been to their farms. And these are not just people from Benue, these are people also from Nasarawa, these are people from Plateau. So this displacement is beyond people leaving their houses, they're also leaving their livelihoods. And the effect is what is showing up on the table. We have food inflation, because if the NBS releases its national inflation figures, food inflation figures at the moment, it could put the national average at, say, 26%. But if you go to some of these places where you have displacement in high numbers, Benue, for instance, last time I checked, it was 52% food inflation. So you have more people paying more money for less food, getting less value for their money, and people are becoming much more desperate, becoming much more poorer. So on one hand, you might sit here and then you might look at the displacement and say, oh, okay, these people are suffering, they left their homes, they left their livelihoods and everything. But at the end of the day, we in other states, the mere fact that they are unable to go to their farms and then to farm and then to sell, we in our dining tables and in our pockets and our bank accounts, we are going to feel it as much as they are also feeling it.
Absolutely. Our time is almost up. So going forward, what should be the immediate priorities for the service chiefs?
I wouldn't just put it as only the service chiefs. I think I also put it as across the security services, including the police, the NSCDC. Again, like what I said, the prioritization should not just be on national security alone. There should be a lot of investment into policing. There should be a lot more interest into putting the insurgency in the Northeast at bay. I don't think the service chiefs themselves are pulling enough of their weight. Right now, it appears that they are in a management position where they tend to react to ISWAP attacks rather than being on the offensive. In the lead up to the 2015 election, it wasn't so. They took the fight to Boko Haram and it dislodged them in many of the camps so much so that the elections in that year could happen. Right now, the Nigerian military is on the back foot, and I would like to see where they're taking the initiative. They know where these guys are in the Timbuktu Triangle, in the southern fringes of the Lake Chad, in places like Abadam. They know where they are. So I think it's time for that kind of a synergy to take the fight to them, and then to relieve some of the pressures from the battalions that are in those interspersed places in the Northeast, and then also greater policing in places where they know that they are at risk. In the North Central, especially in Benue, the police is doing quite a stellar job, because some of the survivors you talk to, they say the Nigerian military is not helping them as much as the police would, but the police will tell you that they are under-researched, they are understaffed, they are under-resourced, and you can imagine 1 or 2 police officers guarding a full city like Yelewata, a full town. It's practically impossible. So some of those investments in security needs to be upped.
Thank you so much. I'm confident Macharry, senior analyst with SBM Intelligence.
Thank you, Maimuna, for having me.
Coming in this morning and having this conversation.
Absolutely.
It was such a pleasure. Now, on this note, we call it a wrap on our discussion segment. We'll take a short breather now, and when we come back, we'll find out what made it to the front pages of our national dailies. Do stay with us.